Welcome back to the Untangled podcast, where we explore how plausible an obscure alternative reality really is. In today's episode, we turn head-on into the prevailing scientific consensus and choose to look at the linear route by exploring the legendary flat Earth theory. As the name suggests, a bunch of people adamantly believe the Earth is not a globe, but instead a flat, stationary plane surrounded by impenetrable ice walls. But, as we'll explore today, do we believe this hypothesis? Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Less than 10% of listeners are subscribed to our accounts, and it only takes a second to do so. We appreciate any support. Thanks. Welcome, everybody, back to, I think this is now the 12th episode we're doing of this podcast on this beautiful Earth of ours. I'm Simon, as always, and I'm joined by two great friends of mine. First off, my co-host, Han. You want to introduce yourself, as always.
Hi guys, still the same guy. Don't have many more introductions than Simon does, so on to our guest.
Oh wow, I was going to ask you how your week was, Han, but I will skip that now.
I will not talk about my week. It's been bad. Thesis stress is terrible, so let's continue to something more fun. Daniel, how are you doing?
Hoe gaat het, mijn vrienden?
Hey.
Hello. Thanks for the welcome. As Han already gave it away, my name is Daniel. And I met Han, I would say it was 11 minutes ago, so I feel like we formed a deep bond. And I met Simon, feels like many, many years ago now. But I only heard about this podcast recently, and I'm quite excited to be a guest today.
But how's life been for you, Dan? Because I understand you're back in the beautiful Green Isles of Ireland, which I see so beautiful in the window behind you.
Wonderful.
Yes, indeed. A magnificent island it is. Yeah, my accent probably gave the game away already. But yes, I am back in the wonderful city of Cork and the wonderful city of Ireland, our wonderful country of Ireland, I should say. And that's my current situation. Just chilling, applying for jobs. I last saw you in Brussels. We had a brief overlap there when I was doing a traineeship, Simon. But back home for the time being. Me and my mother just hanging out, just chilling. And sometime soon, I should be back in Brussels. But somebody does need to employ me. So if anyone listening to this podcast works in HR or recruitment, then hit me up and get me reunited with Simon. That's all I'd say.
I will put a warning out here, or to the audience. Daniel does not know the topic of this podcast yet. So you've clicked on this podcast and seen somebody hoping to have work. So I don't know if this is going to be the most fruitful avenue for you here. But
you never know. You gotta let out your lines wherever you can put them. Just gotta be opportunistic. I dig it.
Should we start off with a bit of a warm-up question, so to say? So I never like starting with this question because it kind of presupposes something about what we're going to be talking about. But Han, Dan, what is the stupidest thing you used to believe as a child?
Well, that's actually, I know. So as a kid, I wanted to be a banker. So this was when I was 5-6 years old. Do you know why I wanted to be a banker?
I have no idea.
It's because I read a lot of Donald Duck, and I really, really thought that a banker could just have this giant pile of money right there, and you can just go in and swim in it. And that's why I wanted to be a banker. So that's the stupidest thing I thought, probably.
Yeah, it's a nice vision. It says a lot about your perspective on life.
That's pretty stupid. I thought you were going to say, that is pretty stupid, which fair enough.
No, this is a very supportive podcast.
Yeah, no, I support your ambitions to become tremendously wealthy, Han, because then I expect you to start paying the bills for this podcast, right?
Oh my God. Well, you got to wait a bit longer, man. I mean, I'm not going to be a banker. I'm not going to get all the money in the bank, so...
What about you, Dan, or should I go first?
The first thing I thought of is when I was a kid, thinking that my dad had some kind of magical powers when it came to summoning things. So probably similar age to Han, 5 or 6. I remember, used to collect Premier League, soccer, stickers. And my dad would come in from work and would get me to close my eyes, and then would summon up packs of stickers. And I mean, my eyes were closed, so he clearly had a little bit of an advantage. But yeah, I feel like after a while, I would kind of ask him like unprompted for stickers, and he would try to like come up with excuses. You know, like I guess like asking a magician just like out of the blue for a trick, and they don't have anything with them, and they're kind of like, oh, just come back another time. That was kind of it. So yeah, I feel like thinking my dad could just like summon up Premier League stickers on cue was pretty foolish of me.
One of my siblings had a similar thing where we grew up on a flower farm, right? And we had some tulips or something by like our path to go inside. And my sibling was like 2 or 3 at a time. He was convinced that my father would go out every night and turn and like close the flowers at night, then open them in the morning, each one of them. And he would also like turn on and off the light outside because he would always be the last one coming inside. But
I love the fact that the thread here is that kids can one not accept that something just happens automatically. There's got to be a person behind it. Someone's doing this, and two, that your parents are literally gods. Like they can do whatever.
Yeah, I mean, basically, our entire childhoods are like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. You know, that's just
Exactly.
like yeah,
Someone's doing the puppet show behind it, and then you find out the puppet show is actually exactly that, and then you're extremely disappointed, and that's when puberty starts.
yeah.
well, it's also, I always wanted to also say it's just a bit, sometimes there's an easier answer in your mind that still explains how the world works. And what's wrong with, believing that easier answer for a while, right?
Absolutely.
So let's transition it to the topic at hand today. And Daniel, what do you think about this world we live on? Have you ever looked outside beyond the meadows and seen the nice curves of, let's say, the hills?
Well, there are no more meadows around here where I live. You know, there used to be meadows behind my house, but as you know, old people would say, "Ah, it used to be all fields, and now just houses." So I mean,
So you have you have like a clear view of kilometers and kilometers.
I wish I did, but for the purpose of this podcast, yes, the undulating meadows of Ireland are before me.
And you can see kilometers flat in one direction,
Yeah, just like a salt plane. It's amazing.
Yeah.
linear,
Yeah.
perfect. And that's how you view the world, right? A nice non-globular world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like laid it in front of me like a dinner plate.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Because I'm glad to have some support here in this podcast, Dan. Because we're going to be talking a little here today about one of Han's favorite theories, which is called flat Earth. You might have heard of it.
It's come across my inbox, you know, every once in a while, my in tray. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've never taken a deep dive into it because I always thought it was a bit too ludicrous. But I know, Han, you've always been a bit more intrigued by it yourself. Not a supporter in any sense, but where did your fascination start?
Well, honestly, I read a few Discworld books, which I just really liked. And honestly, for me, the idea of a flat world just really appeals. I don't know why. It's just cool. The idea of the end of the world and there's just this giant edge or something of which you can fall off, it just speaks to the imagination, I feel. Whereas a round ball just hurling through space is much less imaginative for me. But maybe that's my fantastical imagination preferring something else.
I guess what's cooler, a cannonball being shot through space or a frisbee just being flung
Flying.
gently through the cosmos?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most theories believe it's just stationary and geocentric, but
Oh,
who
so
knows?
so just a stationary frisbee.
I guess it's a bit less exotic in that sense, but
That's fair.
I wouldn't want to be spinning for all my life, I want to be sitting
Well,
down
we are.
sometimes.
That's a thing. Why don't we fall off the earth? It should spin us off, doesn't it?
Yeah, but to give a quick overview to the listeners who might not have heard of flat Earth, it's if you've ever learned in school that we live on a globular-sized planet. Instead, the flat earthers say it is flat instead, exactly how it looks, flat in all directions. And that's basically the whole premise of the theory. And they just say that, your own senses and observations and perceptions, they overarch, they override what all these corrupt scientists and engineers and learned peoples of the world believe. And I mean, Some parts of it are relatively modern, but some go back to, the ancient times. So today we'll be taking a quick little gander at the history of flat Earth and the debate about how flat Earth came to be, and then a bit of what modern flat Earthers believe. But I will preface it to the listeners that I'm going to be focusing much more on the cool little historical tangents. So if you've come here to listen to me talk about discs and, planes for like hours, this might not be the perfect podcast. But if you want to hear some really unique facts and really weird things about the, founders of this line of thought, stick around is all I'd say. And before we always get started, I always like to ask my guests how much they believe this theory at the outset. So, Han, do you want to kick this off? Do you want to give this a nice little rating? 1 out of 10. I believe 1, no belief at all. And 10, you are the least globular-headed person in this room.
I mean, the problem with it is I really want to believe it, but I really don't. I really want to, though. I wish I could. I wish I could summon that peace of mind, that clarity to just believe this and discard all the things I've learned about it. But I'm going to have to go with a 1. But
That's
I want to
very
believe.
low at the outset.
I really want to believe, but I just can't.
But surely you must believe maybe there's a paradox or two. Maybe there's something you'd struggle with. Or it's still a 1.
It's just, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna stick with the 1. But the good part is that this gives you a lot more wiggle room.
Yes, because I always end up convincing people. Daniel, where do you stand on this?
I'm sadly a fellow 1. I'm a fellow non-believer like Han. I mean, Han clearly has more, more research done into this and more like enthusiasm. Yeah, just for me as a layperson, even I will just I'll go for a solid yet uninspiring 1. But again, wiggle room to repeat the phrase and just give us your best shot, Simon.
Of course, I'll make a go at it.
Go get him, Tiger.
Wow. But I was also just surprised doing all this research and stuff. There were like 1 or 2 points where I was seriously like, they might have a point here. And I really caught myself. I'm like, no, I have a master's degree in something in life. I cannot be slipping into this. I want to maintain the good stature of Leiden University, But there are a few things that make you think once or twice. Okay, so I want to start really quick by going to, the beginning of, not time, but the beginning of thought about the world. Because people used to think, as far as I can see, the world is flat. So therefore, it must be flat. Good logic? Would you believe this logic?
Occam's razor. Sure.
Yeah. Simplest explanation. Yeah.
I mean, solipsism, just like whatever I see is kind of all that there is. So yeah.
I mean, one of the things I would always say to people who are more skeptical of this, you probably have a right to be, is if you lived before like 1000, like after Christ, you would probably be a flat earther and you would be ostracized for not being one. So I know it just shows that thoughts really change over time. But the beginning of where they started to change was in ancient Greece, this beautiful man named Pythagoras was the first who claimed that the earth was not flat. However, it was more of a theory than actual, scientific proof behind it. But, he was one of the first globe heads, as we like to call him.
Judging by this picture, did he argue it was actually triangular first?
I don't know. No, it's because he was more known for its like Pythagorean theorem, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah. But he's holding up a nice triangle to our listeners. But he has a globe in the background. I think that was his other contribution.
That's what you're referring to, all right?
Yes. No. But then a bunch of other philosophers jumped on the train. I think Plato was into it for a little while, Socrates as well, a few others. And then this beautiful guy with the globular head, I want to describe that, Han.
He does have a very round head, I agree. It's very nice dome.
It's very fitting.
Well, it reminds me of the story of Aeschylus, the great Greek playwright and writer of tragedies, who allegedly died when a bird mistook his bald, his big bald head for a rock and dropped a tortoise on it, I believe.
Yes,
and killed him somewhere in Sicily way back when. So the head right now I'm seeing on the screen, I could also imagine a bird mistaking that for a lovely rock.
That is a very, very nice noggin.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that fact, though. It's one of my favorite deaths. Uh, but anyways, this man, he is not the one you mentioned. He is my ancient Greek is terrible, but Aristophanes or whatever, and he made up some kind of experiment to like prove the world was round, where he dug a hole in in Greece or somewhere, and then he had a post in Alexandria, and like at the same time of the day, if it was like all straight, he could kind of see like the sun was like curving in Alexandria, and he's like, "Yo, this means we're on a on a globe."
But it is still just a Greek guy digging a hole.
Exactly, it's nothing that exotic
Yeah.
to it.
So wait, so he had two separate holes, one in Greece and one in Egypt,
Yeah,
and he would travel between the two and like note the differences between them at the same time.
yeah, because I mean, the Earth is big, but not big enough that it doesn't curve eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's commitment. Also, like
Hmm.
maintaining holes in separate countries. Like, I would always be worried that like someone was fucking with my hole in back in Alexandria while I was chilling in Greece. I
Yeah.
mean, if you just saw a stick in the ground like as a passerby, you might just go, oh, free
But
stick.
don't touch that stick.
Exactly.
They're proving the world isn't flat here.
It's like
So
experiment happening.
then you come back and suddenly someone took a dump in it. It's
Yeah,
just a hole in the ground. Why wouldn't they?
yeah. I mean, they can't read. They could read the sign saying science and
Exactly.
progress, so that's not their fault.
Yeah. I mean, even past the ancient Greeks, a lot of societies continue to believe it, not even like a Western based one. So I think Hindu societies believed the earth was flat for a very long time. The Chinese officially believed the world was flat until the mid 1700s, which was remarkably long, actually. But in the West, around 1000, 1400, around those years, scientific consensus began to point out that the Earth wasn't completely flat. There was no like exact turning point, as most sciences demonstrated, but like Copernicus was a really big figure in this, where he proposed his heliocentric version of the solar system. Um, Galileo helped support this when he saw some moons of Jupiter which rotated around Jupiter. And so, if Jupiter has moons and Earth has a moon, they must do the same thing. That was kind of his logic there. Newton, with gravity, kind of said, "Yo, if gravity, keeps things in place, we can be on a globe. It does work." And so there were a bunch of scientists and just thinkers during the Age of Enlightenment who were just, proving we were on a globe. One of these, in the bottom corner, was a beautiful man named Johannes Kepler. And here's where I'm going to take my first little segue. And I'm introducing a new segment to this show. Do you want to guess what it says, Han?
Uh, is it flat or round? Like a
Nope. It is
fifty-fifty
a
kind of thing?
it is a historical murder mystery.
Oh, that's good.
So I am going to present to you a case which ended up in a historical murder mystery, and you guys can decide who was the suspect who killed him.
And do we get to like play characters? Can we like dress up as people? Can I be like a Bavarian Duke of some sort? I kind of feel
I
like we
mean,
could do that
I
character.
will say there's an elk involved, and there is a midget jester involved, and you can find out who gets to be who.
I mean, look in today's Hollywood, neither of us could play a midget jester. So I mean, I don't think we should touch that role.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Well, so it all starts with this beautiful man here. His name was Tycho Brahe, and he is the most interesting man who lived in like the 15th century, in my opinion. Have either of you heard of Tycho Brahe?
I've heard that name, but I
Yeah.
forget what he's known for. If you say
Uh,
it, I'm probably going to remember.
I have heard of him, and I saw a statue of him, or well, a bust of him in Copenhagen last year. So he was from, I guess, the Kingdom of Denmark back then, and
Hmm.
yeah, he was like another astronomer like Kepler.
Yes.
I mean, his discoveries aren't really important. Like, what's important, and what you can kind of tell from this portrait we're looking at right now, is that that's not his original nose, shall we say. Um, so if I remember correctly, he got into like a dispute with his cousin, or like a distant relative of some sort, or maybe like a mathematician, and there was a fight, and he got his nose chopped off, and he had to get like a replacement made out of some metal, maybe it was silver or bronze or
He had
brass.
a bronze nose and a copper
Bronze.
nose, but he also had a silver and gold one for special occasions.
Oh, so I was right with
Wow.
all my answers. That's great. Okay,
Yes,
that's
it
great.
is.
amazing.
I thought
Very
I was
good.
just reaching out in the dark, but no, I actually just had way more
But
information
No,
than I
I
realized.
do wonder if he's got different kinds of noses. Do you think he actually has like, are they all the same shape, or does he have the more slender, pointy nose for a specific occasion, and then sometimes just pulls out the big steel noggin?
You get the Venetian like a mask nose, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What shall it be tonight, sir? The Venetian. Very good, very good.
Well, I'm going hunting for truffles this evening, so I better get the best one. Just
Yes.
the prime sniffer.
Yes, I would
Yeah.
like a very long nose to stick in somebody else's business because I'm going to a party. So
I will say to some extent, him losing his nose in a duel at age 20, the duel was because he and a fellow student of his, they're both 20, disagreed over who was better at math. And so that resulted in this.
why not just do a mathathon or something instead of
So
like
duel,
chopping each
duel
other?
is the way to go. Duel is the way to go. That's how we solve all great mathematical problems in this world.
Yeah,
Oh
and I
my
mean,
god!
like back then, it was like a mark of honor to have, like the same. I think, like in the German kingdoms back then as well, like, to have like a scar from a duel was like a serious badge of honor. I mean, to lose your entire nose, that was a pretty boss move.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Arguably, to some extent, losing his nose in the duel, is maybe like the fourth most interesting thing about him. So he was born into like an influential Danish noble family, the Brahe noble family. He was oldest of 12 children, and he was also a twin, which is kind of cool. Except that the twin died really young, and his first published piece of work was an ode in Latin written to this kid, which is kind of interesting side fact. However, at age 2, depending on the source, and I say depending on the source very strongly, he was either taken away or stolen by his childless uncle, Johann Brahe, because he wanted a child. And his parents were completely fine with it. And he was too, I guess.
Was he that bad of a kid?
I don't know. But anyways, Uncle Brahe quite liked the kid. And, he made him his heir, he showed him his way in life. However, Uncle Brahe, I'm calling him Uncle Brahe now, it sounds cooler. He became a national hero of Denmark in 1564 because he was a vice admiral of the fleet. He did some cool stuff. And that meant he got to spend a lot of time with the king of Denmark, the Danish king Frederik II. So one night in 1965, they were out drinking, as the story goes. And the Danish king Frederik II fell into the Copenhagen Canal. As a good, loyal servant, Brahe jumped in after him, Johann Brahe, and he caught pneumonia and died a few days later. And so that's how,
Did the king make? Did he save the king? Or did they
the king was
both
fine.
catch? All right.
Wait, and does that mean whoever got Prince Willem Alexander out of the canal in Leiden, are they a national hero in the Netherlands?
Only if they died of pneumonia.
Nah, I mean, depending on who you ask, they're more of a criminal than a hero. But...
Yeah, it's illegal to touch the king. Or
exactly.
So, yeah.
You shouldn't touch him. Get out.
Yeah. But anyways, I thought it's a really weird thing to have like your adoptive father die because of anyways, he was fine. He got a nice inheritance out of it, and he went to study. He got really good at astronomy. He got really interested in that area, and he was known for having an unparalleled eye for detail and making really good observations. And he even became the first to observe a supernova, so the birth of a new star in documented history. So that's his bigger claim to fame. And he caught the eye of King Frederick II, who his uncle had so graciously saved with his life, apparently. And the king approached, and he wanted Brahe to be his Lord of the Heaven, which was apparently a pretty cool title back then.
That is awesome. I wish I had that.
But Tycho was not enthusiastic. To quote him, he said, "I did not want to take possession of any of the castles our benevolent king so graciously offered me. I am displeased with society here, customary forms, and the whole rubbish." So he just basically wanted to leave Denmark. But the king was like, no, I like you too much. Here, have some more money. So in the end, he ended up being granted around 1% of the entire Danish GDP to run his, private island and his castle there of astronomy.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he just sounds like he was really good at negotiating. He was just
That's a
like,
good tactic.
oh, I was like, no, I'm actually getting really good offers from the French, and like Denmark kind of sucks. So I mean, you got to offer me these like 6 more castles,
Yeah, the weather is
Um,
awful here, man. I could go to Italy for so much more.
yeah, and the weather will be so much better there as well.
Jesus, man.
I mean, the Medicis are falling over themselves trying to give me
Yeah.
money. So
Harold, bro, come on. You gotta make it a bit worth it for me, you know?
exactly, what's in it for old Tycho? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I got no nose, but I can sniff out a deal still. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it was like he was fed up the social climate because he ended up marrying a commoner. And that was really not accepted back in the time. But, he still got away with it because, Tycho is different and, he does things a different way. Speaking about doing things a different way, in his Castle of Astronomy, which is what I'm calling it now, but like his observatory,
Let's call it the Heaven Castle, the
I mean,
Sky
he
Castle.
was the Lord of the Heaven, but
Yeah.
he was known to have really nice social gatherings. So get drunk a lot, basically.
Ragers.
And he had, and this is where the elk comes in, he had a pet elk, which was tamed. And he used to send this elk away on diplomatic missions to other noblemen. So the elk would just be accompanied to other noblemen to like go hang out with them instead of Tycho Brahe,
So
which is
so
pretty cool.
so basically, yeah, like Tycho's elk and like Caligula's horse senator. You know, it's there are jobs out there. If and that's why they call him Tycho the Psycho.
Tycho the Psycho is good.
I will say the elk may not have been the best choice for the job because one night he was at another nobleman's place and he went upstairs, he went to the banquet hall, and he got quite drunk on very good strong beer, according to these accounts, and tried to go back downstairs but tripped and died. And that was the end of the elk.
Oh,
Wow.
that's such a sad ending for an elk. I
And
mean,
this is a legitimate historical story from 500 years ago, which I may point out is quite insane.
it's kind of a boss move as well. If you don't want to go somewhere, to
Yeah.
just send a servant with an elk. Be like, the great Lord Tycho didn't want to hang out with you, so here's this elk, and you can pet him, I guess.
I mean, I'm just kind of like, it kind of depresses me that this elk is a better documented life than like 99% of my ancestors. You know, all these Irish peasants, working in the fields, and this elk is just living it up, and like, it's the
This
stories
drunk
writing about
elk.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Takes
anyways,
more of the high life than most of Ireland during that time. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it wasn't fun back then, like that much.
I mean, nothing lasts forever, even for good old Tycho. So in 1588, the King of Denmark, the Frederick II, died, and he was replaced by his 11-year-old son, who did not see the value in keeping Tycho around on his amazing salary. So eventually, after some squabbles, Tycho left and was basically exiled and ended up in the employment of Rudolf II, who was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, and became the imperial court astronomer in Prague, which is pretty cool. There, however, he had to deal with an annoying kid named Johannes Kepler, who wanted to be his assistant and pestered him for it a lot. Anyways, eventually he was let Johannes Kepler be his assistant, but they did not get along whatsoever because Tycho was known for his own heliocentric model of the universe, where the sun would be at the center, but the Earth kind of like no, the Earth would be. Anyways, it was a different kind of model where the sun was at the center, but the Earth kind of rotates but spins. But it still wasn't like the normal heliocentric model, which Johannes Kepler liked, but Tycho hated. So they actually had like a year-long argument at one point where they refused to speak to each other, and they just had a terrible working relationship. A few years later, in 1601, Tycho suddenly fell over and died. And this is where the historical murder mystery comes in. Who do you think killed Tycho Brahe? And there are three possible candidates.
It was the elk.
Uh,
My
Perhaps.
my guess is that Tycho's original nose came back to seek vengeance.
That would be my fourth theory. I would think that maybe he made a weird nose with like mercury in it or something,
That could have
and
killed
then
him.
just ended
Yeah.
up poisoning himself or something weird like that.
I mean, he's too smart for something like that, right?
There was an account. I didn't include this within the reasons he might have died, but he was apparently really into alchemy, but really bad at it. So some think that he accidentally poisoned himself quite terribly and died from that, but it was very unconfirmed. But yeah,
Okay, so I'm gonna say mm, that he was kind of messing around a bit too much with his theories, and Rudolph II was kind of getting sick of his bullshit. So he had Tycho bumped off via poisoning.
that's an interesting call. Actually, Rudolph II loved him. People seem to really like him, except for Christopher IV, which was the young king of Denmark. So that's the first theory. I'll talk about it real quick. So in the middle, you can see the young king of Denmark, Christian IV.
Oh, wow.
He was kind of young. At this time, he would have been around 18, 19, but he might have aged up a little. He was like 18, 19, a moody teenager, and he still had a vengeance against Tycho. However, it emerged that, according to historians, Tycho Brahe had been sleeping with his mother, Queen Sophie of Denmark, who was Christian IV's mother, which was not a great look. And Christian IV was not a really cool guy about it either. And he ordered Brahe's cousin, Eric Brahe, to go out and poison Brahe. This was actually the inspiration behind Hamlet, according to some historical sources. So, do we buy this one?
I mean, he is a prince of Denmark, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, in that portrait, he seems to be holding a rifle. So I mean, and he's like 8 years old in that photo. So I mean, if he was like that at 8 years old, I mean, at 18, probably a vengeful king.
Yeah, this looks like the kind of kid that burns little animals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Peels the wings off flies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second suspect is our good friend Johannes Kepler, who there's legit historical hypothesis that he murdered Brahe, poisoning him, mainly because right after his death, because Brahe's wife was a commoner, there wasn't a good establishing of a good established heir. So Johannes Kepler was able to take all his scientific findings and use them for his own theories, which Brahe never allowed. And Johannes Kepler also got Brahe's old job, his old position, his old salary, and everything. According to a quote by Kepler, he wrote, "I confess that when Tycho died, I quickly took advantage of the lack of circumspection of heirs by taking the observations under my care, or perhaps usurping them."
I mean, it's all pretty convenient for old Johannes just swooping in.
Absolutely. I mean, the age-old question, cui bono, like who benefits, would definitely point to Kepler.
Yeah. So the third one is just his natural cause of death. Do you want to guess how this guy died?
Heart attack.
I'm gonna say indigestion from eating too much rich food.
Dysentery.
It's worse than that.
Oh, God.
So, according to Kepler, who his first-hand account survived this, Brahe was at a big banquet hosted by Rudolf II, and he really needed to go relieve himself. However, Brahe refused to do so because he thought it would be a breach of etiquette. When he got home later that evening, very late, he found himself unable to relieve himself and in excruciating pain, and within a few days, he was dead. This is one of my greatest fears, by the way, just being so self-conscious to not do something like go to the washroom and then dying from it or something.
Well, I mean, he could go to the washroom when he got home, right?
No, apparently his body couldn't let him anymore.
I'm pretty sure that must have. I mean, isn't that just like cancer? Probably,
I guess so.
Right? I mean, it's not like the social pressure of not being able to piss is going to make you permanently unable to piss.
And he wrote in his deathbed, he lay dying, and he apparently wrote his own epitaph and wrote, "He lived like a sage, but died like a fool." And that is the story of the great Tycho Brahe.
I mean, it also sounds like one of those things. Like I definitely remember my mother warning me as a kid, like when I like holding it in and not going to the bathroom, of her saying "You'll do damage to yourself if you do that." It's like the classic. It's like say your eyes will go square from sitting too close to the television. It's like a mother's warning, just coming true for poor Tycho Brahe.
I'm pretty sure poor Tycho Brahe just had some underlying disease, but yeah, poor guy.
He was exhumed twice.
Why?
They wanted to see what his nose was made of for the first two times.
Didn't a big old collection of them that was just lying around. They
wanted to check. Apparently, it was buried with one of them in him, and they were like, "Are you sure it's copper or is it gold?" And they really wanted to check.
and also that they wanted to prove that his actual name was Hans Sprungfeld. And yeah, they had to exhume the body. So.
I mean, they did also take some mercury tests where they found mercury within his magnificent beard hairs, but they thought maybe not enough to kill him. So
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
We didn't comment on his facial hair actually. He has, or what he had, a cracking mustache. I mean, kind of
Oh,
just like
indeed.
a
Oh, yeah,
droopy walrus kind of situation. That
yeah.
yeah, it's credit to him.
I mean, this picture of him right here, he's just got such an egghead. It's insane. Like, that is the most
Are you
oval shaped
insulting the
head.
Danish here?
No, I mean, egghead is a positive designation. He's just a very
Is it?
smart dude, and it shows.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm sad his theories of the universe didn't live on because it would have been much better for flat Earth. And I mean, we are talking about flat Earth, even though we spent 40 minutes avoiding the subject at this point. So back to flat Earth. So you could prove it via science and these scientists, but the weird thing about flat Earth is that there's no good experiment you can do in your home which proves that the Earth is round. It requires a massive laboratory. However, you can take a trip and travel, and that could prove the world is round. So, one of the first to take the voyage around the world was Magellan from, I think, Portugal. He took a nice little trip around the world. It took him 3 years to do so. He didn't even make it back. And people are like, yeah, so he went around the world. Seems like the world is round. Right, guys?
You would think so.
You'd think so, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you draw on a flat Earth map, you can totally do the voyage without having to go around
Yeah,
the
of
world, right?
course.
That doesn't prove, because if it's an east-west voyage around the world, the different question is, what about a north-south voyage around the globe? So where you start at let's say England or so, and you go all the way down to Antarctica and then back up again and all the way around. How many times do you think that's been done in history?
Airplanes, maybe a couple
I
of times.
mean, I guess trying to get over the entirety of Antarctica would be
But you can
extremely difficult.
you can kind of like curve around it. I think that's allowed if you
Yeah.
want to do that.
Yeah,
I
okay, you
mean,
can.
I feel like yeah, in the history books, there's always east-west they kind of talk about with like circumnavigation, and I think in general that's kind of what people try to do. So yeah, maybe as Hans said, like someone flying has maybe
Yeah,
done it a couple of times, but I don't think I don't know if anyone's ever actually sailed that kind of
yeah,
way.
I'm pretty sure it's impossible to do that voyage by sail because you're just going to freeze. You're not going to make it through the sea without.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, we have icebreakers. It's insane to me
yeah,
that
we do
technically,
now. We do now, but I mean,
even
ice.
today, though, even today, I don't think this voyage has ever been made. A complete north-south circumnavigation of the globe. Half of it has been made from like north to south, but never the entire thing,
Crazy.
which is kind of suspicious, would you not say? Like if it's the only type of voyage you can't do on a flat Earth map.
It's also really cold. That's my theories.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Shackleton and all the boys in the Endurance back in the day getting stuck in the ice. I mean, it was pretty difficult. So
Barents got fucked over by trying to sail too close to the ice. So I guess a good sailor wouldn't risk it.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, talking about ice and getting stuck in ice, one of the great explorers, Captain Cook. When do you think Antarctica was first, laid eyes upon?
Hmm.
um, I think it was like this. I want to say like 17, like the first half of the 1700s. I'm pretty sure. So I think that there's a connection. Is it von Bellinghausen? I think might have been. It was some like Prussian guy. I think was the first person to spot it, like first European. That's somewhere vaguely at the back of my mind because I think there's some connection with my hometown of Cork to this, but I would need to research it actually before I make any ludicrous
Yeah.
claims.
The main point of me saying is, I think the Captain Cook voyage was the first expedition to get near Antarctica in the history of like humanity, basically. 1775 was when that happened.
Hmm.
The first man to step onto the Antarctica continent was an American sealer in 1820. That's mighty suspicious, is it not, to get to the Great Big Ice Shelf? Because for all these conspiracy theorists, they think that instead of Antarctica being a continent, it's just to start a big ice wall around the entire globe, right? So for it to be discovered that late, I don't know. It raises some questions, don't you think? And I mean, compounding this kind of intrigue is the fact that Antarctica is governed by some really interesting treaties. So the Antarctica Treaty and stuff like that was signed during the height of the Cold War, with both the Soviet Union, America, UK, all the great colonialist powers and all the great conflicting powers agreeing to not conquer Antarctica, to just protect it and, militarily keep everybody out of it to protect its nature.
Yeah, well, they kind of did that too for the North Pole. You guys did that.
I mean, we technically own it to some extent, so.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
basically, there were no indigenous people to enslave and no, like, no money to be made out of it. So they're like, this would be no fun to colonize. So you know what? Like, for once, let's share and be nice about it.
Well, to be fair, the moon doesn't have people to enslave either, and they still went there and colonized it.
But it's got some good, like, minerals and stuff. So I mean, I
Well,
guess
the
for
moon.
extractive purposes, it probably
Well,
will be worth your while to set up a base there.
Well, so does Antarctica. It's got a lot of
There's
it's got
allegedly
a lot
maybe
of-
some oil, I guess. You
Well,
can
there's
find
got to be a lot of
meteorites.
rare metal. There's going to be a bunch of metals there, I guess. I mean, the North Pole is actually rife with the stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Earth is flat then. Well, I mean, that's
Yeah.
you've convinced me.
It's
I
true.
mean, basically, all I want to say is Antarctica is just a really weird continent. We think of too little in this world of ours, in this worldview of ours. And the flat earthers has really taken advantage of that by just asking, why do we think so little about it? Because it's the great ice wall they don't want us to go over. But, yeah.
What happens if they actually bore through it? Good God.
I don't think. I mean, the accounts, at least the older accounts, are always like, "Oh, you'll just meet storms and impenetrable storms and storms," basically.
Pretty sure there's one theory that you will meet the ultimate racist country, like the ultimate Aryan paradise is beyond the wall as well.
That's inside the Hollow Earth, and that's going to be a different episode. But
No, is that? I mean, inside it's also. I'm pretty sure it's called Hyperborea. I think I mentioned it in the one
yeah,
podcast. That
yeah. So I mean, depending on the flat earthers you believe in, some believe that beyond the ice wall, there's more places like Earth. We're just expanding other land masses and continents, and that would probably have Hyperborea. Others believe Antarctica is the entry to the Hollow Earth, which is a different theory altogether.
all right.
And others believe that Antarctica is just an impenetrable wasteland which you can't really get through. And then there's this really interesting theory. Like if you see the little voyage of Captain Cook, you can see he took a really big detour in the Pacific Ocean to just sail around. And that was him searching for Terra Australis, or the hypothesized continent that would reside between Australia and South America, because they figured there's a big hole there. There's nothing there. So, but yeah.
And a la Thanos, everything has to be like perfectly balanced.
Of course.
So-
Otherwise, the planet's gonna skew. It's gonna like tilt over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are the big trips that I had, to show you guys. I didn't think it won you over too much. But, flat Earth, it was a bit of a little more, people started to realize in the 1700s, in the like 1600s, 1700s, that, the world was a bit globular. However, in the early to mid 1800s, the flat earthers began their, inquisition into our modern society. And this all began with this English inventor, I say inventor in, brackets, named Samuel Rowbotham, who wrote with a cool acronym. He actually gave himself a nickname for writing his books. He called himself Parallax.
Parallax. Oh my
Nice,
God.
like the Green Lantern villain.
I guess so, yeah.
Like parallax scrolling.
Yeah, no, it was a cool nickname he gave himself.
It looks pretty. I mean, he looks pretty intimidating in that picture too. He's just
Yeah.
glaring heavily.
Okay, to be honest, I don't think he was a good person, and I don't want to spoil his character, but apparently he was involved in several death by misadventure cases, including where he allegedly poisoned one of his own children accidentally.
Is that death by misadventure?
I think
That's
he
just
was
murder.
having some kind of adventure there, but
Come on, boy, we're going for an adventure.
you can drink vile A or vile B.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I'm going to test the survival instincts of a 3-year-old kid.
Anyways, he ended up publishing under the pseudonym Parallax. He published Zealtic Astronomy: The Earth, Not a Globe. A really nicely titled book. And the main crux of his argument about why the Earth was flat was this experiment he made up, a piece of proof he discovered called the Bedford Level Experiment. So he figured that, you know how the Earth is supposed to curve, right? So let's say you go into the famous Bedford Canal in England, which was a really long straight canal. and you stand in the water, and you have a telescope, and you look at some guy in a boat sailing away from you, and sailing away from you, and sailing away from you, eventually he's gonna drop out of sight because the Earth curves. And if you do the math, this should actually happen. And my man Samuel Robotham stood in the middle of the water, took out his telescope, and he didn't see his friend disappear. And he said, "Voila, the Earth is flat," and that was his proof. So this was a bit of an obscure experiment for a little while, until about 50 years later in 1870, some guy named John Hampton read the book, and he was convinced that the Earth is not a globe, and was like, let's replicate this experiment. Let's put the science to the test. So he put a bet up that to anybody to prove the Bedford experiment and prove it wrong. So this guy named Alfred Russel Wallace came up. He was a friend of Darwin's, so somewhat of a scientist, and ended up disproving him. The referee said, he's actually right, but Hampton refused to accept, and he published a pamphlet which said Wallace cheated. He sued Wallace, and he ended up, after a few court cases, Hampton was imprisoned for threatening to murder Wallace and Lebel. So I guess this is how flat Earth goes.
At least he stuck to his guns.
Yeah.
Literally.
I mean, if that was Tycho Brahe, there would have been a duel. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
I feel like he should have challenged him to a duel. That's much cooler.
The courts, litigation, arbitration, it's all just so boring. I mean, just two guys with sabers or two guys with pistols at dawn. That's the real living right there.
I think we can just turn this into a flat Earth experiment too. We'll just say, all right, I'll just stand over there, way over there. You shoot right at me, and if it's flat, you kill me.
I'll see you at Bedford Canal tomorrow morning, 8 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. Draw it. Bring your sharpest gun.
Yeah, but what do you think of the Bedford experiment, though? Because we know the Earth does curve, right? And one of the big pieces of evidence is, have you ever seen something disappear over the curve? Because apparently, if you just look at a ship sailing away, and they call this a sinking ship experiment, if you take a magnifying lens, you can always zoom it back into vision, right? So why does this happen? If the Earth is flat, then that should happen. But if it's curved, it shouldn't.
Good question. I've never tried it.
I mean, I don't know if it's not enough distance, or do it light refracting. Because I know the way when the sun sets, it actually sets either before or after you see it setting. The way the light kind of refracts, kind of plays an optical illusion almost. So I don't know if that's something similar, but yeah, I'm showing my complete lack of scientific knowledge here, but it's something maybe to that effect.
That is the scientific explanation. They call it refraction, but it seems very dubious to blame that on every type of condition where you can still see the ship after so long, according to the flat earthers. Because
this refraction is almost too convenient, you would say.
Exactly. I mean, that is their argument.
It's almost like your theory is doing its job.
It's
like any good theory, it should be right only 50% of the time. It's right every time. Okay?
Exactly. Yes, you should have built some kind of mistake. This is not fair.
Yeah. But people kept going to the stupid canal and kept trying to do this stupid experiment. A few years later, his work was preserved by some lady, Elizabeth Blout. Yeah, she went by the nickname Zeteo. Yeah. They all had cool little nicknames.
That's cool.
God, yeah, it's like an early 4chan form or something.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
You can just see him going to this parlor with all these masks on to be anonymous. I'm Zeteo. I believe that the Earth is flat.
I mean, also what I would say is the people in Bedford and the Bedford Canal, I mean, if you were a business owner just trying to transport coal or whatever, and every second day there's just some new gobshite just standing in the middle of the canal with a telescope, you'd be Jesus, we have business to do here. Find a different area for this.
It's just the fifth I've run over this month.
I keep hearing weird bumps on my trips, and I just don't know if it's a rock or if it's a flat earther.
Yeah, apparently, I guess in a more feminist fashion, Elizabeth Blout, she did this experiment with some kind of white sheet, where she would just take a telescope and look at a white sheet she hung up at certain angles on the canal. So I guess they had to avoid now white sheets she was hanging up at everywhere. But Yeah. Apparently, they kept doing this. In 2015, they tried it again sometime. And they gave up halfway through because the weather conditions were terrible, but the boat still didn't disappear. So they considered it a victory because it disappeared in the fog. So,
It
yeah.
disappeared in the fog.
So it wasn't the curvature of the Earth, it was the fog, so they couldn't see it.
Oh yeah, so that makes me right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like
Yes, clearly your theory is wrong. It should have disappeared because of something else.
clearly the globalists sent the fog in to try and discredit the experiment, and with their weather
Absolutely.
machines.
There are
Yeah.
goddamn smoke machines everywhere.
Yeah. So the flat Earth map, so to say, the one I'm showing now, is called the new standard map of the world. This is the most accepted flat Earth projection of the world. It's created by some guy named Gleason. His name was Alexander Gleason in 1892. He also wrote a book. Cool title. It's called "Is the Bible from Heaven? Is the Earth a Globe?" That's the title.
Yes, but just look at the size of Australia on that map. I mean, I know that the regular Mercator map is also off in that it kind of skews the further away you go from the center.
Yeah.
But this, like, that's not Australia. That's a pancake. That's a rolled out. That's like somebody went over Australia with a dough roller.
We'll talk about map projections a bit later because I have that for like the modern segment because I have three
Right.
main things I want to talk about there. But it's true. This is basically just a modern map projection of I think the Azurial projection. So it's not that far off, right?
No, because I know they like the maps do not actually, they're not accurate
Yeah.
exactly because we're like fitting them into a square frame and it's a globe. Like you can't actually fit them on it. But
Yeah.
still about.
But
Yeah,
I guess
so really, a flat Earth map should be the most accurate of all, and yet we get this monstrosity.
I mean I don't think it's a monstrosity, it's
Look how
accurate.
small Canada is. That should offend you. That should offend you.
It should. We'll talk about it a little later. That's all I'll say. I'll put some suspense here because I had a few slides planned on that too, a few pictures for it. But we're not done looking for our 18th century cast of crazy flat earthers because there was some other cool nicknames. There was a guy named Thomas Winship who had the really cool nickname Rectangle. That was his nickname.
What?
Yeah. I don't know why.
Call me. You just walk. I can just imagine this guy walking into the secret society, and everyone's introducing themselves with these cool ass nicknames, and he didn't actually think of one, so he's just looking around, frantically looking at random objects, and said, "I'm actually call me." Looks to the side and sees like a frame. Rectangle.
I mean, the vibe I got was like that there was like a meeting beforehand, and they were like pulling names out of like a hat, and and his was just left to the very last. He's like, "Guys, who put in rectangle? That's who we're supposed to write down cool names for each other, okay? And I'm stuck with rectangle.
Yeah, you guys call yourself Parallax and Xerophon or something, and I got rectangle. Seriously?
Come on.
Yeah. But the weirdest thing is he also wrote a book. Terrible title. Let me read you the title and tell me what part of it conflicts with his name of rectangle. So he wrote, The Zetetic Cosmology, or the conclusive evidence that the world is not a rotating, revolving globe, but a stationary plane circle.
Right, it's a circle.
Yeah, but he called himself rectangle because
Yeah.
he's saying that, the Earth is a circle, like, the flat Earth map. But why'd you call yourself a rectangle then?
I mean, I also love old-timey book titles. Like, they just didn't know when to stop back in the day, They would just slap 90 words on the front of a book and think, that's really going to grab the reader and their attention, I mean, it was like, it was giving a lot of credit to the reader that they would actually focus that long on the cover of a book.
I had some wit to it. I mean, this guy, Albert Smith, I have a quote of his up there. You can read in a second, Han. He went by the cool name Zetites. Zetites, maybe. I don't know.
So much cooler than rectangle. Again.
Yeah. But he wrote a book called "Is the Earth a Whirling Globe as Assumed and Taught by Modern Science?" That was his title, question mark title.
That's just...
Do you want to read excerpts from his amazing masterpiece, Han?
I will do that. It yet remains for the Copernican school of astronomy to prove that the earth upon which we walk about so complacently and the country which on a fine day looks so calm and peaceful is flying through space at a total aggregate speed of something like 86,000 miles per hour. Shall we blindly believe a theory which in the nature of things is so impracticable, and a theory which directly contradicts the evidences of our God-given senses, We feel no motion, we see no motion, and we hear no motion, while our senses favor the reasonable and demonstrable fact that the earth is stationary.
What do you think of his wise words?
I think it makes sense. Why am I not being blown away? I feel like we should all be falling off.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like, as you said, Simon, like up until a certain point in history, everyone's just gonna walk around thinking, yeah, of course it's flat. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we're all just chilling here, you know.
I mean, are people? What do people in Australia? Do people in Australia just fall off? Is that what you're trying to make me believe?
Yeah, so I mean, it like when you lay it out, obviously, but you know, it's like most of science doesn't really make sense. Like physics and stuff just doesn't make sense. And physicists will say that, so it's kind of
this is the quote for the episode. Most of science just doesn't really make any sense.
it doesn't make any common sense. You know, you're just kind of like, well, I can't see it, and the same way it's like, how am I spreading COVID? It's like I can't see the COVID particles. So I mean, it's not there. I mean, I breathe, and someone gets sick. It's like, but I'm not giving them anything. It's like, come on, guys. So
My senses tell me otherwise.
I can't hear COVID. I can't see COVID.
Look, I'm just an empiricist.
Yeah. My favorite book title, though, from all the ones I found, was from William Westfield. He called it "Does the Earth Rotate? No," and that was his title.
I swear to God, these people just have BuzzFeed articles for book titles.
He changed it up nicely though, because like his peers were posing questions, as like a little bit of a teaser to get you to read the book, and he was like, you know what, I'm actually going to avoid clickbait entirely and just answer the question in general.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the rest of the book was just white. It was empty. He kind of already blew his load. He already blew his load in the first thing you see.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I didn't think about that. My least favorite person from the early flat earthers was this guy named Wilburn Voliva. Does he look like a certain American politician to you, just off the bat? I saw this immediately.
Yeah, he does look, especially there's like 3 photos here, and the third one he looks quite Trumpian. I would say.
Well, does he look like Diefenbaker?
He looks a bit like Ted Cruz, in my opinion.
Oh, he does! Oh my God!
Oh, actually, yeah.
Oh, he actually looks way more like Ted Cruz. Holy shit!
I couldn't get it out of my head until he grew that beard, but the clean-shaven Ted Cruz, so resembling.
That porky, podgy little face. He does have it.
And that haircut too. But anyways, this Ted Cruz lookalike, my man Wilburn Voliva, he was an American evangelist, of course. And he was an avid flat earther, mainly on his religious merits. So he believed, the God-given senses aren't going to prove me wrong. It has to be a flat earth. So his claim to fame was more that he became part of this church called the Christian Catholic Apostolic Church. And this church was really big in a small town in Illinois called Zion. Eventually, he became like a minister there, and he became leader of that church. And that church got so much influence over the town, he technically became head of the town of Zion. And he was known by a title of General Overseer. Can you see where this is going?
I get kind of. Keep going.
I mean, it's getting very culty.
Very culty. And his idea was to create a flat earth utopian society within this town, where everybody knew and lived by the ideals of flat earth.
What is the ideal of flat earth?
Basically, you teach kids flat earth in school.
Right. To spread their ideas all over the globe.
Exactly. So I guess he is an evangelist, so that makes sense. Like, the ideology is just to make everyone believe what you believe.
But the issue of being an evangelist is that, and taking over a small town, basically, is that you start to ban things which people like. So he started banning alcohol, dancing, smoking, just
football,
fun in general.
Just reminded them too much of the round earth theory.
And in 1909, they were like, okay, it's election season. Maybe we want actually a real government in place. So the good people of Illinois, of Zion, Illinois, had an election, and this guy lost. His party was out of power. So you said some Trumpian thing there, Dan. He refused to give up power. Do you want to read his quote to the audience? He's a quote from May 1909 when he first lost election, but he did not give up power.
So, yeah, this is him in May 1909. We are fighting for the right and for religion, and we do not intend that these men shall gain control of the city through illegal voting. The old city officials were re-elected and must be given the offices. I've hired 2 big attorneys to prosecute those who perpetrated these election frauds. I'm in business.
Very Trumpian.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the second one.
Yes, and this was by the Detroit Free Press, the second one. Also May 1909, just talking about the situation in Zion.
Zion City is trembling on the verge of riot. The city hall there is filled with heavily armed policemen, supporters of Voliva, while the independent or anti-Voliva faction insists that it will seat its newly elected officers.
How do you think this ended up?
Well, they probably got a bit rowdy, didn't they?
That's a good way of putting it. It turned out to be a 300-man fist fight by the courthouse, which is not bad. There were apparently hundreds of injuries, and Voliva was rousted out of town. However, one Voliva supporter, the chief constable, the police chief, called A.K. Walker, or A.H. Walker, A. Walker, I'm going to say A. Walker.
Walker.
Yes, I can't. Anyways, he was the biggest Voliva supporter. He blockaded himself in the county jail with 2 years' worth of food, water, ammunition, and a willingness to fight people off. So, yeah.
So Flat Earth meets Doomsday Prepper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now that is more American than apple pie.
However, this story doesn't end here. It gets more American. So, Voliva was back within a year. Apparently, his church had significant money, and the town was in significant debt after his rambunctious spending. So he literally bought the entire town on a 1,100-year lease, and he basically installed himself as a dictator.
1,000-year lease.
Yep, apparently you could do that if you had money.
Oh my god!
And when he became basically the ultimate overseer of the town, he went full flat earth. Apparently, they started teaching this curriculum in every school, enforced everywhere. He also stripped down on fun even more. People weren't allowed to wear bathing suits anymore. He had an 800-person Zion guard who carried Bibles in their gun holsters to enforce his law.
What?
And I mean, this, it's like, the religious police that the American right would warn you about in the Middle East. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. I wonder actually when he was running out of town, if you stood in the middle of Zion with a telescope, would you see him disappear over the horizon?
I mean, it is Illinois; it's pretty flat there.
Yeah, it's pretty flat place. The Great Plains and all that. I mean that. I mean, what was the federal government doing? Were the state of Illinois / I don't know who's president in 1909, Taft or someone. I mean, were they just yeah, this is town in Illinois that's being run as a dictatorship, but it's not causing us any problems.
Well,
I think so.
I guess they had bigger fish to fry at that point, maybe.
And it was also kind of Depression era, kind of. So if somebody's willing to buy a town.
Well, I mean, when did you buy the town? Because 1909 is before that, of course.
I think it was 1910 or so. But anyways, to spoil the story, he remained in power till 1934-ish, when the people had enough. And they voted in a new school board, apparently, who cracked down on his flat earth teachings. And it kind of unraveled from there on. And he ended up leaving and going to spend the rest of his days in Florida, like our former President Trump.
Of course he did. So, but what I'm wondering is, whatever happened to that 1,100-year lease?
I don't know.
Yeah, did they just rip up the contract and say, no, get out of here?
I guess, yeah. I mean...
Fuck off.
I'm kind of curious, because I know the Guinness brewery in Dublin, there's a 900-year lease on that building. And I'm just kind of what, did they just pluck a number out of the air? Were they just let's just pick a big ass number. So just 1,100. Or maybe there's some biblical significance to number 1,100. I don't know in this case. But yeah, it just feels very just a publicity stunt more than anything else.
Exactly. I mean, with Hong Kong, with the 99-year lease, it kind of still had a logical endpoint. But I mean, that does feel I don't want to deal with this now. We're gonna let the next generation deal with this. But this is not even that. I mean,
Yep.
Ireland might not even exist by that point. Illinois might not exist by that point anymore. We don't know.
Yeah,
900 years is a long, long time.
I mean, the chief constable should have locked himself up with 1,100 years worth of food to see it through to the end of the lease. If he was smart.
He just comes out like that Grail Knight from the third Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, exactly. Are like Fry in Futurama, just like emerging in the year 3000, just like
Except he's a religious loony.
Exactly,
So he just
yeah.
pulls out a Bible.
A religious Ted Cruz, you know.
Thank God they've probably finally proved the Earth to be flat.
Yeah. I mean, and this kind of is where, like 1930s, this is kind of where like the flat Earth kind of dries up, and flat Earth kind of stayed pretty subdued until the internet became a thing, and people, especially around 2014, 2015, it started spreading a lot more because they figured YouTube was a great place to do so. Um, so I have a few things that modern flat earthers will love to point out. I'll just quickly run through them as the final proofs, and then we'll start wrapping up because we've been going for a little while right now. Anyways, the first little thing that we should talk about is planes. So certain flight routes don't exist which should exist, and certain flight routes do exist which shouldn't exist. So let's say you have a plane and you're trying to fly from Australia to South America. What's the quickest route?
Well, I mean, apparently over Antarctica.
If you believe in a globular Earth, that's the quickest route.
Right.
But it never happens. There are no flights that really go over the Antarctic continent whatsoever.
Oh no! What a shocker.
Okay. And is
Sounds
that like the airspace is like not like just controlled by any country, so there's no like way of like monitoring it? Is that why?
Um, officially, the reason for this that I found out is that New Zealand had a flight, which this is a really weird story too, which was a sightseeing jumbo jet flight over Antarctica.
Well, that's
And
pretty cool.
they ended up running into a hill which was larger than they thought and killing everybody on board.
Oh, that's less cool.
Yeah, but the whole idea was like a sightseeing jumbo jet over Antarctica. But
That is awesome. I would like to be
and
on
they're
that.
like, since it crashed in the middle of nowhere, we're no longer sending stuff out over Antarctica. But
Well, there's a second reason as well, because if you look at it like this picture, which is a round picture with Antarctica in the middle for the listeners, with Australia and New Zealand on the bottom, and then all these lines going over Antarctica to South America and South Africa. But the thing is that this distance is pretty long. So the question is, first of all, can we actually make that on a single tank? And second of all, who's going from New Zealand to just South America? Like, there's not that many people going on that route. It's not really popular, is it?
yeah, that would have been my rebuttal too, because but then again, it's kind of unhandy if you got to fly from like New Zealand to like the UK, and then from UK to LA, and then from LA to Brazil. That's such a detour. You'd think there'd be at least one like token flight, right?
Well, I mean, no, because flight companies are money hungry bastards.
Guess so.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess in general around the world, like flight routes are often a bit weird and kind of more circuitous than you would think. Like I feel like that not every flight is just a straight line. There are a lot of weird kind of flight patterns out there that I guess like, well, I guess in Europe less so, but yeah, if you're traveling intercontinentally, you probably would notice that there are some weird kind of strange flight
Yeah.
paths for different reasons. So I mean, that would be my rebuttal.
There are a few that flat earthers really love to point out. So first is the Johannesburg to Perth route, which, despite there being an island in the middle, I forget which one, they always go to Dubai first and then to Perth. However, if you lay this out on a flat earth projection, it's almost a straight line. Coincidence?
Yes.
I mean, I said to Seychelles, I guess, chilling
Yeah.
in between.
I think that was the one.
I mean, I don't think for a Johannesburg to Perth flight to Seychelles would have probably the means
No.
for it. I mean, it's like a bunch of islands in the middle of the Indian
Yeah.
Ocean.
There's a very good reason that there's just a lot of flights go through Dubai, Kathmandu, all that. No, not Kathmandu,
But
Kuala
what
Lumpur and
about
those places.
the England to Texas flights, or like any flight from Europe to like America? You always end up crossing through a part of Quebec on the way there, if you've ever noticed.
I've not ever. Well, actually, I've been to Texas, but I didn't know. So.
When I went to Canada, I flew via Reykjavik because it was cheaper. So I'm not the right person to ask in this
Yeah,
situation. So,
but there's always like a portion where you're randomly over Quebec. And why is that when you could just fly straight to like Texas? And the reason is if you put it on a flat Earth projection, a straight flight from like England to Texas goes right over Quebec. No other explanation for that.
Hmm.
Suspicious. Suspicious.
Suspicious.
Yeah. Also, I was talking to you this somewhat jokingly earlier on, but they always said when hot air balloons were invented, they're like, people will be blown away. This will prove the Earth is flat because if you put the hot air balloon up and the Earth is spinning, the hot air balloon will stay in place while the Earth spins away.
Yeah.
This didn't happen for some reason, which is why the Earth is flat. Similarly, when you have a plane and it flies against like the curve, the turning of the Earth, and with the turning of the Earth, so east-west versus west-east, both flights take the same time. Why is that when apparently the Earth is spinning at 18,000 miles per hour?
I forget what I forget what it's called, but there's a scientific reason for it, which I do. I know this one, but I don't know it. I remember it.
I'm going to say relativity. I'm just going to Einstein.
I I
That's
would
Gravity.
guess on that too.
that's what I go for. Yeah, and I mean, I guess over the Atlantic, it is slightly quicker. The Gulf Stream, it is slightly quicker flying
Yeah,
back. But yeah, I,
definitely.
I'm gonna go relativity as my answer to most of these questions.
That's a good. I'm proud of
Einstein.
you to say.
Something Einstein is probably the reason. Physics.
Yep.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that like flight maps of like World War II, like the one I'm projecting now, perfectly fit onto a flat Earth projection. Nothing wrong with that. And they can still be used. So I don't get your arguments. I mean, if the world is flat, they wouldn't use these maps, right? I also want to talk a bit about maps because one of the things that stood out to me is how wrong most of our modern maps are. If our modern maps that we know and love, like the Mercator projection, are so terribly wrong, why couldn't the flat Earth map be right? That's kind of my logic. Like, for instance, if we look at the map we all know and love, right? Like, what's wrong with this map? Like, give me a few things that are wrong there right away.
So Canada's way too big.
Yeah,
Greenland's way too big.
yeah.
And I think Australia is too big as well, and Africa's too small.
Any other things, Dan, that you think might be not that great?
I mean, I would say that Hannah's kind of covered most of them. Those like the 4 or 5 complaints that I've heard myself previously. That yeah, Europe kind of Eurocentricity means that yeah, we're too big in this continent, and then yeah, Africa gets kind of screwed over, and then yeah, the edges kind of get stretched out to a disproportionate level.
Yeah. The other thing to note is that the standard Mercator projection is not centered. Like the equator on this map is about 3/5 of the way down instead of in the
Hmm.
middle, which is really weird, don't you think? It just shows that there's so much nothingness below the equator. Like a fun fact that people might not know is that most of Australia, including most of Tasmania, is closer to the equator than Rome is.
Oh, wow, that's pretty crazy. I didn't know that. I thought the equator was more the second line, the top line
Nope,
of this.
that's
These
the
three.
Tropic of Cancer or
Yeah,
Capricorn. I forget
yeah,
which one.
crazy.
Yeah, but it just goes to show for if you're really conspiratorial, you'll be like, it's because there's nothing and nothing and then the ice wall, right? Um, but
Hmm.
it is
Yeah,
kind of mind blowing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the ice wall is also on the top, so yeah.
I mean, just to give an example of the sizes of the continents, this is what the map up. I threw up a map up for those listening of just the sizes that they project on the Mercator projection and the reality in like physical landmass. And I mean, if you guys want to make any observations, Greenland is looking pretty tiny.
Russia is also just not looking good.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, Europe is doing pretty. The Netherlands is doing pretty good. I think. I think we're. I think this makes us look better. I like this map more.
Yeah, I would say like like Southeast Asia is looking pretty solid. South Asia, Africa got like a bit of a raw deal. Yeah, definitely the northernmost parts, like so Scandinavia, Russia, Canada, Alaska, Greenland.
Canada's tiny.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean they are all losing a lot of mass
yeah.
Yeah.
in the real projection.
Here's a trick question: What's the second largest country on Earth by landmass?
Country, not Latin.
Yeah, just country. First is Russia, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Who's second?
Oof.
I believe it's Canada, with all the islands
Um,
and stuff.
Australia?
According to textbooks, it's Canada, but it's not the case. Technically, the caveat I put here is by landmass. So when countries calculate their size, they also include their territorial waters. So Canada has a ton of territorial waters. So and same with America. So technically, they're overrepresented on these charts. And technically, the second largest is actually China because they have so little territorial waters. Their pure landmass itself, if you can look in this projection, you see it's actually quite decently sized. That, or I just read some Chinese propaganda, but
yeah. And I mean, they're trying their best to claim a lot of territorial waters. You know, so trying to get.
I mean, they're improving on that end, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, the interesting, I think I remember one thing about the Mercator map. Mercator, let's say the most American way, Mercator, is that it's supposed to be measurable, so you can actually put a ruler to it and have like a proper representation of the distance, which is why these continents get blown out of proportion. Because of course, if you put a ruler on a map that is actually supposed to be a globe, then you're going to have to switch around with the thing. So an actual representation of a map like this one wouldn't actually work as a naval map. Whereas, Mercator does.
Whereas the flat Earth map might. But, and they've been calling for the Mercator map to be disbanded since like the 1940s from like quotes of seeing stuff like that. And if you look at Africa, like within Africa, you can easily fit America, China, all of Europe. It's huge. And the most famous supporters of the flat Earth is obviously the United Nations, which has adopted it on their official emblem. Which flat earthers love to bring up.
Stupid Australia looks so fucking odd. I can't get over Australia.
Yeah, I never noticed Australia before on the UN logo. Yeah, crap it looks.
It looks so drawn out. It's insane. Yeah. It's like you could. It's just. I can't get over it. I can't. It's as long as Russia. It's the same length as Russia on this map.
I also love how flung off New Zealand is. Like it just went flying.
To be honest, New Zealand is actually pretty far away from Australia still. Because when I went to New Zealand, I had to. I mean, New Zealand is just a fucking far away place in general. It took me going to the US was 12 hours.
Yeah.
Going to New Zealand was 36 hours.
That's like half your
so much further. Like when you get to Singapore, you're halfway there. It's insane. It's so far away.
So that's basically flat Earth. One thing I will say as a challenge, if you guys want to take up this challenge, is find me a picture of Earth's curvature that's not from space, and it is surprisingly difficult to do. I tried.
I thought you were going to say head to Bedford Canal.
Here are your tickets. Let's go tomorrow.
Yeah. Daniel, here's your telescope. Han, here's your rowboat.
Yeah, there we go. The Bedford level experiment.
If you guys want to take a quick few minutes, use your Google, because you think like the Earth is curved, right? It's very difficult to find a good picture taken from Earth that is curved. Apparently, the rapper B.O.B. is an enthusiast flat earther, and his epiphany came when he watched Felix Baumgartner jump from space, and he couldn't see the curve.
Oh yeah.
So.
Right.
Makes sense. I mean, I'm looking at pictures from like salt flats to try and find the curvature of the Earth. So I feel like that's like a good bet.
How are you gonna see the curvature in a picture though?
But like you'd expect that, right? If the Earth curves at like a steady rate, you should be able to find a picture of it, right?
But why? It curves at a steady rate, but why would you see if you're looking like this?
Yeah.
Does it? I don't know. Maybe my thinking isn't right, but I don't see how you can see the curvature anyway like that. Depends on you'd have to see something move away. There's got to be some kind of movement.
But every kilometer it has to curve a certain amount, like an inch or so.
Right. So what are you supposed to see if you look at a horizon?
It's supposed to curve it. If you can look far enough, if you take enough equipment that can zoom far enough beyond your peripheral vision. the globe, I don't.
That
Well,
doesn't make any sense. A horizon is like if you've got a ball and you like just take a football or anything, just hold it like this in front of your face. If you're not moving the ball, if you don't have any reference point on it, it's just a line.
okay.
You,
Uh, I thought it was
I mean,
interesting.
relativity. That's all I'm gonna say.
that's a good one. That's yes, and that concludes us talking about something we don't really understand.
Very true. Uh,
Yeah,
What do
yeah.
we study again? Humanities? Well, good luck with
There you
that.
go. I mean, look, yeah, I think it's really, yeah, it's just like our eyes just not really being up to the job either. Probably
mhm.
our
Yeah.
like part of it might be just our brains aren't really designed to handle this, so our brains just like flatten out things. Maybe they edit this out because maybe this is really, really, really stupid thing to say, but I also do feel like our eyes can also play tricks on us in the same way, like
Yeah.
with the horizon and stuff. So yeah, that might also play a part in it, but that could also be
Yeah.
complete horseshit.
I
Yeah.
mean, should we start wrapping up and talking about what we think about the podcast today? Do you want to go first, Dan, as the guest? Do you want to give your thoughts, your
Uh,
final opinions, anything new you've learned, and then upgrade your rating to at least a 2.5? Please.
yeah, I found it very interesting. I mean, I knew very little about it. I kind of knew about the ice walls and stuff. I kind of vaguely heard about that and some of the historical context, but yeah, there are some interesting elements to it, and especially the point you made earlier about like Antarctica being a very mysterious place that we still
Hmm.
know very little about. And I think like you know when we don't know much about it, you can kind of fill the gaps with some really weird shit,
Yeah.
and that it's open for mad interpretations. And I think that's kind of a good example of how yeah when when science doesn't come up with an answer straight away or gives a rather difficult answer, people just naturally respond with something a lot more straightforward, which can seem quite tempting, I guess.
And were you at all convinced by anything I said today? I know this is a long shot, but
No, I mean it's a long shot. It is. I mean, it definitely will get me to look into so many elements, I guess, of like I guess some of the flight paths and stuff, because I feel like I just kind of accepted some of these things without really wondering why.
mm,
And there probably are logical reasons to it, but at least it will encourage me to look into some elements of it a bit more to find out what the actual reason is. I mean, it's not going to be flat Earth, but at the same time, it does pose questions, and it will lead me to knowing a bit more about the world that isn't flat Earth related.
yeah, next time you're on a plane, you can't be looking out for the curve the entire time. You got to get that window seat right.
Yeah, yeah. Bring a spirit level, and it'll be good to go.
Yeah. Uh, what about you, Han? I'm hoping I worked my magic at least somewhat here. Although I feel
Well,
like my stories of Tycho Brahe was probably the highlight here.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the historical nonsense about around flat Earth is probably more interesting than the theory itself, isn't it?
That was my logic heading into this, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't think I'm more convinced. I am more interested in things like Antarctica, and just it kind of reignited my interest in world maps because I kind of like maps, and I like the fact that they don't work. And I don't know, the planet is just kind of cool. So the way I thought the world looked and actually functioned when I was a kid, looking at these flat Mercator maps, isn't actually right and representative. That I always thought was really cool. That distances aren't necessarily the way they represent it.
Yeah, because I mean that last sentence you said, that was what really was kind of sticking with me when I was like in the depth of this, like watching the documentaries, watching the YouTube videos, where it was like, if what I believed as a child and still believe what the world looks like as a map now is not correct in any sense, honestly, how come it couldn't be flat to some extent, right? Like how can I prove that my own knowledge is true without relying on these scientists in their silver thrones or like their faraway
Well, I
laboratories?
mean, that gets us to the heart of every conspiracy theory,
Exactly.
right?
But and I think that's what makes this one so endearing because its scope is so grand, right? Like you can't just like I was saying earlier, there's no experiment you can do which can prove the Earth is really flat from like or the Earth is really round from like just your bedroom, right?
Hmm.
It's a weird
Yeah. Do
conundrum.
you know the? I feel like you missed one fun part, though. I think you kind of skipped over it in the beginning when you mentioned Indian Hindu mythology. Do you know how the flat Earth looks in Hindu mythology?
I didn't look too much into that, but go on,
Yeah,
please. Pray, entertain me.
so the theory is essentially that the Earth is flat. It's a disc, which is hoisted on the back of four elephants, which are standing on the back of a giant turtle.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's this story where a woman was apparently once asked, "So what's below the turtle?" And she said something along the lines of, "You can't fool me, Sonny, but I know it's turtles all the way down."
Uh, well, I guess here it's conspiracies all the way down, and that wraps up another episode for us at this beautiful podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you listeners also enjoyed our brief foray into this flat world of ours, please drop a like, drop a subscription, drop a comment asking us to see what you want to see and hear from us next, and I guess
Make sure you don't drop off the edge.
exactly, and don't drop off the edge. Wow, that's a good segue out of here.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. I hope to do Hollow Earth next time. I'm on to complete the set. But no, it was a pleasure, and I would love to come back and cover whatever.
Yes, we'll do that sometime. Sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted, but goodbye, everybody. See you next time.
Right. So